Hi, I'm Pastor Steve Kimes. I'm going to tell you three stories you already know. So, first story. In February, there was an African American man. He was running down the road. He happened to stop by to check out a construction site, and then he ran on. Two neighbors saw him running and assumed that he was a burglar that had stolen their gun out of their truck about a week before. They grabbed their guns, the ones I guess they had left, hopped in their truck, rolled in front of him, in front of the man running, and one of the men jumped in front of him. He was afraid of this man with a gun confronting him, so he struggled for the gun, fighting for his life. And the other man in the truck shot the African American man until he was dead on the road. And his name was Ahmaud Arbery. This week, another African American man was trying to purchase an item, and the shopkeeper thought that he was passing a counterfeit bill, so he called the police. The four officers came, handcuffed the man who had the questionable bill, placed him on the ground, and one officer put his knee on his neck, choking him to death, while two other officers held him down to make sure he didn't move while he was dying. Onlookers, including a member of the fire department, told the officer to get off of him, that he was killing him, and the officer refused. The African American man who died, his name is George Floyd. At the same corner that Mr. Floyd died, protesters began throwing water bottles at police cars, put the block at a standstill. Thousands of people showed up, and some broke windows at local businesses and lit a new apartment construction on fire. Property was destroyed. People want these deaths to end. They want justice for their people, for all people. They want justice and not executioners on the street. Now the third story. There's a Palestinian guy. He's on the outside of the justice system, and he saw thousands of his people die as leaders would pilfer the land and the people for the resources that they needed for slaves and free labor. People would die because of the decisions of the leaders, and there was no consequences to what the leaders were doing. So the Palestinian came to Jerusalem to confront the Jewish authorities. And he brought a huge group of other Palestinians to Jerusalem as well. And they marched in the city, declaring that they would take over the leadership in order to have their voice heard. And then that Palestinian went over to some local businesses and destroyed their property in order to have a voice, in order to be heard. And when the authorities confronted him, he declared, "You have killed people instead of bringing justice. And because you want to continue to do injustice, you will kill me too." And they declared him a terrorist, and they killed him. And you say, well, Steve, you said you were going to tell three stories that we knew. And we know the first two because it's all we've been hearing about lately. But I don't know if we know the third one. Oh, well, that Palestinian, yeah, his name was Yeshua, or we call him today Jesus. Because Jesus, even though he was a Galilean, that's actually the old name for what we would call today a Palestinian. And Jesus destroyed property in the temple, destroyed businesses in the temple, and then he confronted the Jewish authorities, just exactly like that. And then they decided that he was a terrorist, and they hung him on a cross. It's a story we know. But maybe we didn't realize that it was quite as contemporary as we thought. A lot of times we Christians think that we grow closer to Jesus by reciting words of the communion and taking the bread and the cup. And there is a powerful reminder there about the unique reenactment of the Passover, of people being delivered from slavery. We are reminded in the communion that, like Moses, Jesus was declaring the end of an oppressive society, and that Jesus was sacrificing himself to create a new society, one of justice and peace for all who work for justice. To take communion, to go to church, to live quiet, peaceful lives makes us good Christians. But that is not following Jesus. And Jesus never asked us to be good Christians. That isn't what he wants. He asked us to follow him. To follow Jesus means to go out where the neediest people are, to meet their needs, to heal them, to feed them, to find out what they need, and to provide it. To follow Jesus is to confront authorities when they harm the poor and the oppressed. To follow Jesus is to teach the next generation, or this generation, how not to get along, not how to get along with others, but how to create a new, just society. To follow Jesus is to stand exposed, protesting against justice and the death of the innocent, and yes, perhaps even destroy property if that brings forth justice. To follow Jesus is for some to sacrifice themselves for a new society, to be arrested, to be beaten, and perhaps even to be killed, so that way others might live in justice and free from oppression. To live like Jesus is really closer to be a part of the Black Panthers. It's really closer to be a part of Black Lives Matter than to be a member of Campus Crusade. Jesus never said, be a nice person. Jesus never said, make your neighborhood a nice place to live. Jesus said instead, if anyone would come after me, then let them deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me. To follow Jesus is to get your hands covered in shit, to get your hands covered in blood, to be screamed at by the people who you're trying to help, to be blamed by authorities for all the problems in society and to be punished by them for the good work that you've done. Now, I'm a pastor. I said that at the beginning. I'm a pastor, and so it's my job, the job that I get paid to, is to help people to be better Christians. But as a follower of Jesus, that cannot be my job. My job as a follower of Jesus is to tell you to get involved with Black Lives Matter. My job as a follower of Jesus is say, be a homeless advocate and meet the needs of people that you see on the street. My job as a follower of Jesus is to tell you to create a society of justice like what Jesus was trying to do. And that we do that not despite the fact that authorities are going to hate us for it, but because of the fact that authorities are going to hate us for creating justice for everyone. Jesus was an enemy of the government. And he was an enemy of the religious institutions as well. If we're going to follow Jesus, we need to stand for Ahmaud Arbery. The followers of Jesus stand with Black Lives Matter, under Black leadership for George Floyd. Say his name, George Floyd. Thank you. The followers of Jesus have no room to complain about property damage. The followers of Jesus will stand for the homeless against NIMBYs. The followers of Jesus will stand for the Palestinians. They will stand for the Kurdish peoples. They will stand for Native Americans. The followers of Jesus will stand with the poor and oppressed right when and where they are being oppressed. It's time for the followers of Jesus to stop allowing the passive and pro-police, anti-women, and pro-rich groups to represent us. We need to stand with Jesus, who stood against unjust authority. We need to stop the leaders of Christianity to represent us when they refuse to speak out for the oppressed, when they refuse to allow the poor to speak. If they won't speak as Jesus would have, then we must.